So it's been a while since the first part of this Slavic Iceberg chart thing, and that's because the first part got quite a bit of criticism and a lot of it was justified. So I thought to myself, if I ever make a second part, it has to be kinda foolproof. I wanted to research it a little bit better. I wanted to be more careful with, calling stuff Russian, for example, instead of Slavic, which probably confused some people who thought this was just Russian folklore, which it is not, and today you will see. It took a little while, but I think it's been worth it, and as you know, as all Iceberg charts go, we're going a bit deeper into stuff that's, I guess, less known. Now it's more like actual regional creatures and stories and, some mythology again. Also, listening to what you guys said, I decided to change the names of these videos and call them Eastern Slavic Folklore Icebergs, because that reflects better what they're actually about. So keep in mind that this is mostly just stuff from the area between Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. I wanted to thank the original creator of the Iceberg chart, Return to Crab, because he also provided me with some more literature on this stuff, which helped a lot with the research. And also, before we begin, I wanted to thank our sponsor, which is nobody. It's me. I have a Patreon if you're interested in that. It's not like I'm asking you to subscribe. Now let's get into it with the first entry. Neo-Paganism. So the first entry is already a hot one. You see, Slavic paganism in general is quite ancient and shares its roots with the other Indo-European traditions or cultures of the time, like the Nordic culture, for example. That's why you'll see many similar archetypes in their gods or their folk creatures. And the problem here is the fact that there's no real written documents of this period in time. Everything we know about Slavic paganism is actually passed down either orally or by Christian monks that wrote some books around that time, in the Middle Ages. Here's the problem, they were Christianizing everything, so those books only give us some ideas about what those people at the time believed. Everything else, as I said, is just oral traditions, old folk tales and stuff like that. So what about Neo-Paganism? Things being the way they are, Slavic paganism is prime ground for hoaxes and cults and just made up stuff. The most famous movement of Neo-Paganism in the Eastern Slavic countries is known as Rodnoverye, which basically translates to native belief. There's a few problems with this. Most of these cults just made up history. All of their beliefs and all of their rituals and stuff are basically made up, and made up quite recently, might I add, since the 50s pretty much. But we'll talk about the books they base their beliefs on a bit later. Anyway, these people, you would like to think that most of them just live in the forest or, in a field somewhere and just burn some effigies in springtime or something, which is partly true, I guess. But one of the problems is their ties to Nazis and extreme nationalism and anti-Semitism. Yeah, this is one of the symbols that many of them use, known as the kalavrat, and yeah, it's a swastika. And you would like to think that it's just because some of their beliefs are also based on Vedic or Vedic, how do you say that? Vedic teachings or writings, which were the basis for Hinduism, for example, so the swastika would make sense. But no, you got outright like white supremacists with their own little cults just throwing up their right arm, saying that it's like an ancient salute, I guess. They're often looked at with suspicion, as you can imagine, by everybody else. Some of them believe in the superiority of the Slavic race, because they think they descend from a superior Aryan race, which is sometimes believed to be aliens, but again, we'll get into that. Not accusing all of them of being Nazis, but it is true that a good portion of them is very nationalistic, white supremacist, with their own little cults in which they indoctrinate people. In fact, I found that a lot of them apparently believe that academic teachings and science were made up by the evil Jews to keep the Slavic people down, or to distance people from the original real beliefs. But it is true that because of how none of the ancient history of the Slavic people was actually passed down to them, they had to make stuff up. You cannot deny that part, at least. Sadko. Sadko is a popular character from the ancient Belinas, in particular of the Novgorod cycle. There are a few slightly different versions of the main story about Sadko, but the main one goes something like this. Sadko is a guslar, aka a player of the gusli, a popular instrument at the time, basically a sort of ancient guitar or harp. Anyway, this guy is really good at playing the gusli. He's always invited to the feasts of the richest men in Novgorod, and he always plays for them. But one day they do not invite him, and he's very sad about it, as you can imagine. So sad and abandoned, he goes to the shores of the lake Ilmen and just starts playing his gusli. And he doesn't notice this, but while he's playing, the water starts to boil or move. And this happens 3 times. On the 3rd time, from the water springs forth the Sea King. And this guy really loves Sadko's playing. And he tells him that he wants to basically give him a reward. He says to Sadko, go back to Novgorod and place a bet with all the merchants. Tell them to come to the lake and tell them that you will be able to fish out the fish with the golden feathers. Yeah, I don't know why the fish has feathers, but don't ask. So he does, and they go to the lake and he fishes out not 1 but 3 fishes with golden feathers, because the Sea King basically gave them to him. He wins the bet and basically becomes hyper rich and becomes a merchant. He builds like 30 ships and starts sailing around the world and just being the greatest merchant that ever lived. Until one day when they're sailing back to Novgorod with like barrelfuls of silver and gold and stuff like that, and the sea becomes very agitated. In fact, a big storm rolls in and it's about to destroy their ships. That's when Sadko realizes that this is probably the Sea King being angry with him because he never really paid his due. Basically because they haven't been paying their tributes to the Sea King. And they try to empty their barrels of silver and gold in the sea, but this doesn't help. Until Sadko realizes that the only way to calm him is to give himself up. So he takes either like a piece of wood or a dingy boat and goes by himself in the middle of the sea with his gusli and falls asleep. Then he wakes up in an underwater castle in front of the Sea King, who scolds him, and he's like,
dude, I've given you those 3 golden fishes which made you super rich, so kind of an asshole move to not give me any tributes, so now you'll have to play for me.
And Sadko starts playing his gusli, and the Sea King just cannot help himself, and he starts dancing to Sadko's playing. The problem is that his dancing makes the seas very stormy, and this goes on for 3 days until all the sailors on the sea start praying to Saint Nicholas. And Saint Nicholas, who is sometimes believed to be the patron of merchants and sailors, goes to Sadko while he's playing down there at the bottom of the sea and tells him, dude, cut the shit. You've been playing for 3 days, I think it's about time you stopped. And Sadko is like, well, I cannot stop, the Sea King just loves dancing and loves my music. To which Saint Nicholas goes, alright, listen, you just have to break your strings so you cannot play anymore, and then the Sea King will stop dancing, but he will ask you to marry one of his 901 daughters, and you'll have to pick the 901st daughter. And so Sadko breaks his strings, and the Sea King, I guess, is just like,
oh, well, I guess the party's over. Well, now marry one of my daughters, please.
And Sadko does what Saint Nicholas told him to do, and he picks the last one, known as Dvica Чернавушка. And Saint Nicholas also told him, on the first night of your marriage, don't touch her, and you'll be fine. So he follows Saint Nicholas's orders and falls asleep without touching this Dvica Чернавушка, and just wakes up on the shores of Novgorod the next day and sees the ships with his men come into port, and he is reunited with his friends, with his family, and decides to build a church in the name of Saint Nicholas to thank him for the help. So I guess it's one of those stories in which the moral is, don't forget to thank the people who helped you become the 1%. Pretty much. There are also other versions that I found in which before going to sea, Sadko also places a bet with the other merchants during a feast, in which he says pretty much, I'm the richest man alive, I can buy anything from Novgorod, and they tell him to do so, or he'll have to pay the price of his boastfulness. And he starts doing so, but on the 3rd day there are so many wares that he has to admit that he doesn't have all the money in the world and that Novgorod is much richer, you know, the city is much richer than he is. So again, it's like highlighting Sadko's boastful nature and telling him to sit down, be humble. Alkonost and Sirin. These are basically mythological bird mermaid women. They're usually depicted as big birds with the head of a woman and sometimes even a beautiful human chest. They're found in medieval Byzantine and Slavic legends, and it is said that their singing is so beautiful that it can hypnotize people to the point of making them forget everything. The only real thing that I found that distinguishes the two is that Alkonost is usually represented with a crown on her head, but that's it pretty much. Oh, and probably the fact that her name and her character are probably based on the Greek myth of Alcyone, who was turned into a bird by the gods. Rusalka. So this is the start of my descent into madness, because this is a big one, and a very varied one too. My whole life I thought that Rusalkas were just cute mermaids, and apparently that's not completely wrong, especially for like modern beliefs, but that's just like 1% of the story. In general, Rusalkas are believed to be undead female spirits, but their appearance, their actions, the reasons for their existence change drastically from region to region. One thing to keep in mind is that the modern imaginary around the Rusalka has been very influenced by the writings of romantic authors, and they often describe the Rusalkas very similarly to the Greek nymphs, so they also absorbed a lot of their stereotypes, I guess. They were described as beautiful women inhabiting rivers or lakes that would come out at night and brush their long hair and just like try to maybe scare passerbys or lure them into the waters or just fall in love with a young man. And from what I understand, this romantic vision has especially influenced the northern Russian belief around the Rusalka. But when we move a little south and west, things get wild. It seems that the colorful folkloric traits of the Rusalka have been especially preserved in the region of Polessia, which is a historical and natural region that pretty much stands on the border between Belarus and Ukraine, and also has a little piece of Poland in it, from what I gather. And in these places they might also go by different names, like the Ukrainian Mavka or Navka, or Myrtvushka or Laskatucha, I guess, and the Belarusian Vodyanitsa, Kupalka, Kasitka, or Smolyanka. If I get any of this wrong, it's not my fault, it's the books, alright? So the hard part here is that they can be pretty much anything the more you dig into it. We have a similar situation to the Leshi here. I'll just give you a taste, alright? Let's do this in a almost bullet point kind of way. So, how do Rusalkas come to be? And I'm quoting here. They could be children who died before being baptized, people who died by drowning or suicide, people who were either born or have died on the Green Week or the Trinity Week, basically the 7th and 8th week after Easter. They could be women who were engaged but died before marriage, or women who never got married, or alternatively any person who has died. Which really narrows it down, thanks. Some say that it's people who died by being struck by lightning, or children who were cursed by their parents, or dead witches, or people who died by animal attack, or even men or domestic animals who died on the week of the Trinity. I actually made one of those up, but I bet you cannot guess which one it is. Not even I remember which one it is, actually. This is just their origin story, but there's a lot more. For example, what about their appearance and actions? They could appear as beautiful women, sometimes clad like brides, or sometimes as really ugly old hags with really long hair and a huge pair of bazonkas, which could sometimes be really saggy. In fact, so big and saggy that they're sometimes described as putting them on their back, I guess for ease of transportation. And in other versions they're made of iron, and they can crush you with them. Other times they're just described as normal looking women, but that's kind of boring, right? They could appear as just dead people wearing the clothes they were buried in, or as mermaids, as children, as human shadows, or as men. Again, really narrows it down. They are often said to be evil spirits that would follow people and do bad things to them. For example, drown them, or just in general attack them or scare them. For some reason, one of the most recurring elements was that they could tickle somebody to death. I don't know why. They were also sometimes believed to kill your crops, or to be able to, like, turn your head backwards. Or just in general lure people towards the water and drown them there. make people lose themselves in a forest or snatch them to the underworld, kill someone with a single look, or braid your horse's mane. Very evil indeed. Other times they're described as nice spirits, or at least neutral. They were believed, for example, to teach people to behave correctly and put them on the right path. Or they would just hang around swinging from tree branches and singing songs, swimming in lakes or rivers and washing their clothes. So I hope you understand what I mean when I say this could be literally like anything. What I think actually happened is that many different smaller cultures or villages had their own like beliefs in undead female spirit with their own like characteristics, and in time they just kind of got mushed together. So we had maybe bigger regions then in which a lot of people believed like a mix of all of those classic folklore elements. If you talk about Rusalkas now, most people would probably imagine a mermaid or just an undead female spirit who lives near the water or a river or in a forest or in a field and is usually antagonistic to human beings. You have no idea how much of a focus on breasts there was in this part of the research. Not sure why, that was pretty strange. Anyway, moving on. The Swan-geese, or Гуси Лебеды. Now this is one of the many fairy tales collected by Alexander Afanasiev, and it goes something like this. There once lived an old couple who had a young son and a young daughter, and one day the parents have to go to work and they tell their daughter to look after the little brother pretty much, which she of course doesn't do. She just puts the guy like under the window on the grass and goes outside to play and hang out, I guess. At this point, the Swan-geese, which are exactly what they sound like, fly in and snatch her brother away. When she realizes what has happened, she is completely desperate because she knows that if her parents find out, she'll really get it this time. That's when, in the distance, she sees the Swan-geese flying away, and she understands that they're carrying away her brother because apparently these guys have a reputation for stealing children at this point. So she follows them into the dark woods. On the way there, she meets an oven and asks him, "Have you seen where the geese guys are taking my little brother?" And the oven goes, "Yeah, I can tell you if you eat one of my rye pies." And she refuses, so the oven just shuts up and walks away, I guess. This happens again with an apple tree who wants her to eat his wild apples, and a river of milk that wants her to eat like jelly, or like, I don't know how to translate that word. I don't think there's an English version. Let's just say that it wants her to drink some milk from its self. But then she meets a hedgehog, which actually points her to the right way, and she runs that way, and what do you know, she finds a wooden hut with chicken legs. And as we've discussed in the first part of the Iceberg, this is the house of Baba Yaga, the evil witch who eats children. She sees that Baba Yaga is staying inside the house and just minding her own business, and that her little brother is just playing outside on the porch. She sneaks that way, grabs the brother, and just runs away. Obviously, the Swan-geese, who at this point we understand are Baba Yaga's henchmen, pretty much, they give chase and fly after her. And the way back she meets again the same characters. First there's the Milk River, and she asks the river to hide her and her brother. And the Milk River again says, "Drink from me and I will hide you." So at this point she does, because she has no other option. And it hides them. But when they come out of hiding, the Swan-geese turn around and give chase once again. So they meet the apple tree, and the same thing happens, and then they meet the oven and the same thing happens again. This third time the Swan-geese actually stop giving chase and just fly back to Baba Yaga's hut. There's another version in which Baba Yaga invites her in and wants to trap her to basically eat her and her brother, and a little mouse pretty much reveals Baba Yaga's plan and helps her escape. Anyway, at the end, the girl just gets back home right before her parents come, and everything is fine and dandy. So I have only one question. What kind of psychotropic toads were these guys licking to come up with all of these weird stories? This is like the Kolobok story from the first part. It's like, I get the message, but does it have to be so weird? Well, I guess it plays well on the imagination of children, and it seems more interesting that way, so makes sense. Stimulating, you know, talking ovens and talking milk rivers and little pieces of bread that run away from home. Bannik. So the Bannik, also known in Ukrainian and Belarusian as Laznik, I think, is a folk spirit said to inhabit the sauna or banya. hence the name Bannik. He's usually said to be invisible, but other times he's described as a naked old man covered in dirt, or a man with long hair. Some say he has the power to turn himself into other things, like animals, like a cat, a dog, or a white rabbit. He usually hides somewhere inside the sauna, and people would leave like a bucket with soap water and the whisk for the sauna as an offering to appease him. Because if they didn't, the guy would just go berserk. He could start throwing hot rocks at you, or splash you with boiling water, or just scare you, or choke you, or sometimes rip your skin off. And here we go again with the skin ripping. What is it about skin ripping that Slavs really seem to like in their folklore? Also, can you imagine you just go out at night to chill in the sauna and this naked old man starts skinning you? That's an Ari Aster type scene if I've ever heard one. Apparently he would especially attack those that came into the sauna at night or as the last ones to come in. In some versions he's said to snatch newborn babies and replace them with ugly monster babies that would only live for like a few years. I don't know what that is about. But it's not all bad. One could appease the Bannik by leaving an offering of salt and bread, or by burying a black chicken under the sauna. In his less murderous versions, he could keep other evil spirits at bay and even like predict your future. Now, this is a fun one because of how like specific it is, you know, like out of all places there is like a creature that only lives in the sauna, right? And this tells you two things. One is how important the sauna is in these cultures, I guess. And the other is just that they would come up with any paranormal explanation to any bad thing that could ever happen. Like you got into the sauna and burned yourself like a dummy. Well, must be an evil spirit, right? Hoaxes. So here we go. We've talked about how there's no real documents about the ancient Slavic mythologies or folklore or beliefs and rituals, so this makes it a prime culture for the creation of hoaxes. And I've told you about how some of the neo-pagans or the Radnavery based their beliefs on some books that were written in the last century, right? And here are two examples of those books, some of the most important and well-known. One is the so-called Book of Veles, or Velesova Kniga, and it's one of the main sources apparently in which a lot of neo-pagans built their faith. The problem is that the book was published in the 50s by writer Yuri Mirolyubov, a Russian immigrant in Europe. Now, this guy justifies himself by saying that some army guy named Iceberg basically found some wooden tablets that he said to be very ancient with like incomprehensible scripture on it, which looks very much like runes from what we see of these tablets. And so Mirolyubov understood how important these probably were for the Slavic culture, and he asked Iceberg to lend them to him so he could study them and translate them. But of course the other guy said, sure, you can take them, but you can only keep them at your house and you cannot take pictures of them, which is, you know, not suspicious at all. So he started to translate them, and at one point he even says that he managed to take a picture. And this is the picture, I think. I'm pretty sure it's this one. But this one came out only after he was already done with the book. Linguistic experts immediately said that all of this was fake. And Mirolyubov says that right after he was done with the book, this mysterious Iceberg guy died and I guess took his tablets with him to the grave for some reason, because the tablets also disappeared. Well, actually, Mirolyubov apparently said that the Nazis took the tablets because they were into like esoteric stuff, which sure, man, whatever you say. And the book pretty much just makes up a whole alternative history for the Slavic people. Their gods, their rituals, and stuff like that. And linguistic experts looked at the tablet that Mirolyubov allegedly photographed, and first of all, they realized that it wasn't a piece of wood at all, but it was like a piece of paper made to look like it was wooden. But outside of that, they realized that this language was completely made up. When they translated it, apparently some of the words, you know, I'm not a smart guy, but this sounds very stupid to me from Miralubov. Apparently, some of the words that were present, like, or translatable in these tablets were not actually, like, Slavic words at all. They were words that came from foreign languages that Miralubov apparently just didn't know that were borrowed from those languages and thought they were Slavic words or something. You can't make this stuff up. Well, I guess you can, he did it. Another important book for the Radnavere, which is even more crazy, is the Slavic Aryan Vedas, published by this guy, Alexander Kinevich, which also became one of the main cult leaders in the whole movement. He said that these writings were originally given to him on golden tablets that were passed down from generation to generation of these Slavic people. And it's pretty much the same story as the other guy. It's all made up BS. Apparently, this guy, though, was inspired by stuff like Star Wars and sci-fi films in general, because this book goes into like some crazy directions, like the old god Perun sitting in a spaceship and going to other planets to speak with the Greys and other races of aliens, and I guess that the Slavic people descend from the Aryan race of aliens. But outside of that, there's also a lot of anti-Semitic contents in here, apparently. So, yeah. It's just kind of crazy for me how often people fall for these kind of hoaxes. I guess they really need something to believe in, right? But you know, when your preacher starts to tell you that like Jesus was a spaceship driver and like had contacts with some other alien race, maybe you should start not believing him, I guess. Svyatogor. So this is pretty much a giant bogatyr. And if you don't remember from the first part, the bogatyr are basically the Slavic heroes from the epic Slavic poems. That just really strong dudes that would go on quests and defeat evil. Watch that part to know about the three main bogatyr. According to the ancient Bilinas, he lives in the Holy Mountains, or Svyatogor, that's why his name is Svyatogor, which apparently is the only place in the world that can hold him because he's so heavy that everywhere else he just like sink into the ground. He's sometimes present in tales along the other more famous, I guess, bogatyr Ilya Muromets, which I know I made a lot of mistakes with accents in the last video, and I will probably make them again here, but at least sometimes I tried to write them down so I don't forget. But yeah, Ilya Muromets, I guess, not Muromets as I said that other time. So in this one story, Muromets,
don't you feel silly? Don't you feel stupid?
Finds a giant bed in the middle of the forest and decides to just sleep in it. After 3 days of sleep, his horse wakes him up and tells him that something is coming. And they hear this heavy thud from the forest. And it is Svyatogor, who carries on his back a crystal castle with his wife in it, I guess, for some reason. And while Ilya is hiding, Svyatogor just lays down in his bed and falls asleep. But the wife of Svyatogor falls in love with Muromets and grabs him and puts him in the pocket of Svyatogor. Yeah, the sizes in this story make no sense. Anyway, when Svyatogor wakes up, he gets back on his horse and takes his wife in the castle with him. But after a while, the horse just stops and tells him, "Listen, dude, I've been carrying you all my life and that's fine, but I cannot carry 2 bogatyr. That's way too heavy for me." To which Svyatogor is obviously very surprised because he's like, "Where?" Then he looks in his pocket and finds Muromets. He's like, "What are you doing there in my pocket, dude?" And I guess that Muromets just tells him about his wife being like in love with him or stealing him away. So Svyatogor cuts her head, and the two become real bros and start going on adventures together. Yeah. There's this other one, which I guess is one of their many adventures, in which Muromets and Svyatogor find a big coffin, on which there is inscribed a piece of text which says, "He who's destined to lay in the coffin will lay." So obviously the two start trying to get into the coffin. And Muromets realizes that the coffin is too big for him, but as the author of the Iceberg Return to Crab writes, it's suspiciously appropriately sized for Svyatogor. And I guess the coffin just closes and he cannot get out and he dies in there. And like his strength gets passed on to Muromets. Riveting, I know. The Sea Tsar, or the Sea King. So this is the guy I've mentioned in the story of Sadko. and from what I understand, that's his most significant classic appearance. As the name suggests, he is basically a ruler of the seas and the oceans and water in general. He's pretty much like a Poseidon. He's not really mentioned in many other folk tales, and I haven't been able to find much info on him that wasn't really recent, or just like rewritings of recent authors. But one recurring theme, I guess, is the fact that he likes to rave a lot, and when he does it, then the sea becomes really stormy. The Wikipedia page, though, mentions a connection to a Finnish god named Ahti, which is another sea king. So there's that. Poludnitsa. Here we have another complicated one. Basically, Poludnitsa is the personification of noon, or midday, specifically of the dangers that that time of day can hold for people. It's a seasonal creature, usually tied to the summer sun, and is often conflated with the figure of the Rusalka, which we've talked about before. She's especially known in Western Slavic traditions, apparently, and especially again in that area of Polessia, which we've mentioned before, while being pretty much unknown, I guess, in the Southern Slavic cultures. Apparently the Polish call it this, I'm not even gonna try with that. The Czech call it Poludnice, Poludnice, I think, and the Slovaks call it Poludnica, I think. And we got the same situation as before. Sometimes she's said to be a beautiful young woman, other times she's an ugly old hag. Sometimes she's said to be a young woman who died before her wedding, or more in general, somebody who died with unresolved business on this side. The sources on her different appearances are too many to cite here, but it's usually like little differences mainly, something like the color of her clothes, or the color of her hair, or if she carries an object on her or not. One thing that seems pretty common though is the idea that she's really tall. According to some Polish sources, she's like 4 times as tall as a normal person. While in the Siberian tradition, apparently she can change her size at will, which is something that I hate, because it's the same thing as with the Rusalka and with the Lesha. Can you guys just agree on a few basic facts, please? Anyway, the Siberian version of the Poludnitsa shares her appearance with the Rusalka, being a woman with really long hair and a bodacious chest. While in the Western Slavic traditions, she can sometimes be more animal-like and have animal features like horse's hooves or legs or claws or stuff like that. She's said to carry either a huge pan, a sickle, or a scythe, with which she would cut people's heads off. Yeah. And sometimes she's said to be accompanied by 7 black dogs. And you see, this is what makes me mad. Like, the point is that she appears at midday, right? That's literally in the name. But then I read the encyclopedia and it's like, well, some say she can appear in the evening, at sundown, or at midnight. What's the point of even having a folk creature if you can't decide on this stuff, guys? We need some rules here, fellas, some order. I feel like I'm losing my mind over here, man. And even in this case, she's sometimes seen as benevolent, other times as evil. And she can appear in so many places according to different traditions that it's easier to say that she can appear anywhere at this point. Let's put it this way. The general main point of this spirit seems to me the regulation of fieldwork and the collection of the crops during the summer. She basically stops people from working at noon, because that's the most dangerous moment during the day, because the sun could give you a heat stroke, you know? She herself, like, scares you by basically doing stuff like giving people heat strokes, which kinda defeats the purpose if you ask me. But she could also just scare you, or she could tickle you to death, again just like the Rusalka, or also turning your head backwards again and cutting it. Which is a pretty hardcore escalation if you ask me. The waters of life and death. So these are magic waters found in folk tales, and as the name suggests, they have some pretty powerful properties. The function of the waters of death is not exactly what you'd expect given the name. They're fundamentally used to repair dead bodies, so to close their wounds and reattach body parts. And it is necessary to use the waters of death first on a corpse, to then use the waters of life to actually bring them back to life. And this is exactly what we can observe in the folktale of Ivan Tsarevich and the Grey Wolf, in which the wolf uses both waters to bring Tsarevich back to life. So one could ask, why do you need 2 types of water to bring somebody back? Why not just use the waters of life, right? And Vladimir Prop gives us at least a theory in his historical roots of the Wonder Tale. he makes a connection to a specific element of the ancient Greek underworld, particularly to some tablets that were found in southern Italy that were used as a guide in the underworld for people, and they said that the soul of a dead person would find themselves at the gates of Hades pretty much, and here they would be in a state which is neither death nor life, but somewhere in between. In front of them would be two rivers, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left is unguarded and has like a white cypress tree growing beside it, while the one on the right has guards. And the tablets tell you that the first river is useless for your soul, and you need to go to the one on the right and ask the guardians to drink from those waters. Now, this river is not indicated as life-giving, but it is indicated as beneficial to the soul. Prop's theory is that this would actually be the water of death. And you ask yourself, how is it beneficial then? Well, because before drinking the water of death, which gives you the ultimate death and not like a soul stuck in between worlds, only that way you can actually go inside of the underworld. And this would give your soul ultimate rest. So what about the other river? Well, Prop suggests that this is actually the water of life. And it's unguarded because it's basically useless to a soul that's in between, that hasn't yet had the ultimate death, which comes from the waters of death. So it would give them nothing, right? So there's no need to guard it. And that would actually be used mainly in stories which are often present in the Greek tradition of katabasis or katabasis, or of people going to hell, retrieving something and getting back. So to enter hell or Hades, you would need to first die, and when you're coming back to get out, you would need to drink the waters of life. So both are needed. And Prop argues that in the Slavic tradition, these are also present because of this, I guess, cultural connection. For him, I guess they come from this old tradition. And so even the Slavs also have these two waters, although one seems a bit useless at this point. Rod and Rozhanicy. So these ones are complicated. They seem to be very ancient, and this makes their roots very hard to parse. Let's start with Rod because there's less to say. Basically, he is believed to be the god of birth, his name literally meaning birth. The problem is that not much has survived throughout the centuries about this god. Some believe him to have been the most important god in the Slavic tradition and the Slavic pantheon, but there's no real concrete proof of that. Like, some say that he was the creator of all life on Earth, while a few scholars from the 20th century say that he's more akin to something like a house spirit that would protect the birth of a child, and he would be a spirit of a dead forefather. And others think that he's a deity more tied to destiny, which makes sense when we're talking about the Rожаницы. So these girls are a lot more complicated because of their diffusion in many different Slavic regions. They are present in the Western Slavic traditions and in the Eastern ones, but especially in the Southern ones, and specifically the Balkans. This also means that they have like a billion names, and I'm not gonna read them all, but here's a screen cap from Wikipedia. But when it comes to the naming, there seem to be at least two main variations, or at least variations in the meaning of the name. Some are along the lines of Rozhanicy, which uses a root word from like the ancient Slavic, which means birth again, and the other is more like Sudinitsa or Suženitsa, which uses the root word for decide or judge. This is because they're usually believed to be the three female spirits that appear when a newborn is born, and they basically foretell the future of this child or give him his destiny. They're very similar to the Greek Moiras, if you know about those ones. And apparently women would like leave food offerings and stuff to try and appease these goddesses and hope for a good future for their children. Seeing how little information there is about those ancient Slavic times, which seems to be the theme today, most of the stuff that is known about Rod was reconstruction, and especially linguistic reconstructions. Scholars or linguists would basically see similarities in the words used to describe other gods with the same function and reconnected it to this mysterious Slavic figure. I've also seen some theories floating around about the Rozhanicy, but I don't know how trustworthy they are, that say that they're an evolution of older Slavic deities like Mokosh and Lada, or that they're just like the female version of Rod. But again, no real confirmation on this stuff. If you know anything about it, please do tell me in the comments. Tugarin Zmei. So we've talked about a bunch of bogatyri at this point, but never about an evil one. But Tugarin Zmei is exactly that. He's present in different bylinas. He is usually the archenemy of Alyosha Popovich and Dobrynya Nikitich. He may or may not have snake-like attributes, because if you don't remember, Zmei basically means like serpent. The most famous story tells about his battle with Alyosha Popovich, in which Tugarin Zmei is flying on his paper wings and throwing knives at Alyosha, but the hero prays for rain, which comes and basically melts the wings of Tugarin Zmei, which falls to the ground and has to battle him one-on-one and obviously loses. At the end of which, apparently Alyosha Popovich just dismembers his body and throws it around an open field. In some versions it seems that fire is one of his main attributes, and putting that together with the fact that he like flies around and stuff like that, he reminded me immediately of Zmei Garinich, which we've discussed in the first part, and the figure of the fiery serpent in general, which we'll discuss a bit later. Apparently during the Christianization he became the embodiment of the evils of paganism. Maybe that's why he was turned into a human figure, while before he was perhaps more similar to like a dragon or something. I don't know, it's all speculation on my part. Witches and warlocks. So in general, these are not too different from what you'd find in the Western traditions, and both the male and female counterparts are pretty much the same, almost in every aspect, but we'll get to that. Let's start with the witches first. These are mostly known as vedьмы, but also go by, depending on the region, znacharka or znacharka, charodейка, колдунка, волшебница, or as the woman with the flies or the woman with the flies in her nose, which basically means somebody who knows something dark, or somebody that knows a lot of things, or somebody that is like an acolyte of the devil. You know, the Lord of the Flies, I guess. What's interesting is, as opposed to many other figures we've discussed so far, the witches are not believed to be neither a spirit nor a normal person. In most cases, they could be categorized among the dvojedushniki, which means double-souled creatures, pretty much. This is to say that she's mostly a human being, but that she is either like manipulated by the devil or has some dark magic knowledge and is touched by demonic forces, which becomes apparent either by her supernatural abilities or by her appearance. The way she looks is actually not often described, from what I understand, and when it is, she's often said to be just a normal woman, because she needs, I guess, to blend in with the other people in the village she inhabits. Though sometimes she is said to be an ugly old hag. Of course, because old people are scary and ugly, right? As always. Sometimes she's said to have a particularly evil and dark stare, or as having a little mustache, bushy or long eyebrows, or sometimes she's said to hide small horns or a small tail, or even that she has 2 rows of teeth. Again, all depending on the area which you're investigating. A woman could either be born a witch because her mother was one, or she could become a witch by coming into contact with demonic forces, by making a pact with the devil, or by just being in the presence of a dying witch, and that dying witch's soul will basically possess the girl that witnesses her death. It was often believed that the witch's soul would leave her body at night to go and do her witchcraft. And she was especially believed to be active during specific festivities or specific occasions during the year, like the night of Ivan Kupala, which we've already mentioned in the first part, or even just Christmas and other Christian holidays, or on a full moon or a stormy night and stuff like that. Among her many abilities, there is that of transforming into animals like cats, dogs, frogs, or just any farm animal or birds, and into objects, especially wheels for some reason, and just other like farm equipment or farm things. She was basically just playing prop hunt with the villagers. In general, her witchcraft was believed to cause curses, bring biblical plagues sometimes like locusts, transform people into animals or other stuff, kill the crops, but one of the characteristics that I found most often was the fact that she would steal cows' milk. I don't know why that specifically, but she was said to steal it either by just milking the cow, or in other versions she could just stick a knife into a tree and from the tree that would like come out the cow's milk? What? Or she could just look at the cow and automatically steal the milk like that with one look. You decide on the logistics of all of that. There is also a more tentatively positive version of the witch, for which she could be that one strange woman in the village that could pretty much like predict your future, or I guess just in general something more akin to a witch doctor. And I guess that's something that's not really even that archaic, because even in my Moldovan family, my mom tells me that when she was a kid, there was this woman in their town who would cure people's fears by breaking an egg into a glass of water and make them stare into the yolk, and they would see something that would cure their fears, and people would stand by this woman's powers. So, but again, I can see this as one of those situations in which, you know, nobody says anything while she's useful, but as soon as something terrible happens in the village, then she is the one to blame, because of course she is. You know, the usual story. Now, when it comes to the warlocks, generally more known as Koldun or Znachor, but also Vidmak or Vidmach or Charadey and Charovnik, he is more of a northern Russian figure. While in southern Russia, Ukraine and Belarus, he is, I guess, more interchangeable with the figure of the witch. His characteristics and functions are pretty much the same as the witch, but with one big difference that I found. Apparently, he would be more well accepted than the witch. Again, something like a witch doctor, like he could harm others if he wanted, or if you gave them reason for it, but you could just, I guess, pay him to do good stuff for you. Like, he's said to, for example, protect people's weddings from things going bad, I guess. V. Now here's a really cool one. This guy is believed to be an ancient demon with iron eyelids so long that they touch the ground. And if his eyelids would be raised by somebody, then he would kill you with one look. The interesting part is that this is probably just an invention by writer Nikolai Gogol, who wrote a little novella of the same name. Now, while Gogol did write mostly in Russian, his Ukrainian origins were very important in his writing, especially his early work. And I guess the local Ukrainian folklore would really shine in stuff like V. The story is set around Kiev. A young philosophy student is going home for the holidays with his two buddies, and at one point night falls and they realize that they cannot see anything and that they're lost in a random field. So before they have time to actually panic, they see this old wooden house in the middle of the field, and they go up to ask if anybody's in there and if they can let them sleep inside. An old decrepit hag opens the door for them, and at first she says that she has no place for them, but they insist. So she's like, alright, I'm gonna put you in 3 different rooms though, because I don't trust you. The philosophy student, Homa, sleeps in the barn, and during the night the old hag walks into the barn and starts getting closer and closer to him. And he just thinks that she's like hitting on him or something, and he's like, listen, old bitch, I don't want any of that. But she doesn't relent and she doesn't speak and blocks him from leaving the barn. And that's when we realize that she's a witch, because she puts a spell on him, which makes him just stop in his tracks, and then jumps on his back and starts riding him like a horse, which is something I forgot to mention on the part about the witches. This is also something that they would be believed to do, I guess, riding people like animals. And so she starts riding him out of the barn and just over the fields, and he starts flying, and at one point he starts praying, and I guess his praying weakens the witch, so they both land, and he just starts beating the crap out of her. He notices that her voice seems to slowly change as she's asking desperately him to stop, and when he looks back, she has transformed into a beautiful girl, and he just leaves her there and runs away. When he gets back to school in Kiev, the director immediately tells him that the daughter of a sotnik, basically a Cossack military commander, has been beaten badly to the brink of death, and she just crawled back home this morning and told her father to go call for this philosophy student, Homa, to go and pray for her for 3 days after her death, basically as a funeral rite. He protests, but he's forced to go because the henchmen of this rich men are basically there to take him and don't allow him to run anywhere. When he gets to their house, he realizes that this young girl who has just died is exactly the same witch that he has beaten to death. So, of course, he doesn't want to do it anymore. He's pretty scared, but they force him once again. They bring the coffin inside their little church and lock him in. And so he starts reading and doesn't really take the situation too seriously. He starts like lighting up all the candles to make it at least less dark and scary. But of course, at one point, the witch just springs up from her coffin and starts looking for him, although she cannot see him. That's when he remembers an old spell that was taught to him and basically just draws a circle around his little book stand, and the witch cannot get in. Crazy stuff like coffin surfing in the air and things like that start happening, but he is safe for this night. Then he again tries to protest, but they don't let him go. So the second night he also has to stay there. And pretty much the same thing happens, but this time the witch curses him and turns like half of his hair white. And the next day he tries to run away but is immediately caught. And so he has to stay the third night. And this is the worst one, because the witch calls forth all the dark, ghoulish creatures from the underworld, and they come and start looking for him, but cannot find him. That's when she says to bring forth the V. This guy is this big lumbering monster with an iron face, I think, with giant eyelids, and he tells the other ghouls to basically grab his eyelids and raise them so he can find this philosophy student that they want to kill. And, and that's the funniest thing, is just that Homa hears all of this and tells himself like, okay, I just need to not look at the guy in the eyes, because that way he'll find him. So that's all I need to do, right? And the exact next thing he does is he turns around and looks him straight in the eyes, and so the V just points his giant finger at him and basically points out his location for every other ghoul. So they all jump on him and start, I guess, killing him. But then the cock crows, and it's the second time the cock crows, at least in the book. So all the demons try to scamper away because morning has come, and they cannot do it in time, so they just stay stuck in the walls of the church. But it is too late, I guess, for our young philosophy student Homa. His soul has already left his body. So the novella is from like 1835, I think, and I'd really recommend you to read it because it's a lot of fun. It's not just like a horrid story, it's very heavy on the humor too. And obviously there's also the film from 1967, which I didn't expect to be so good. First of all, it's like almost exactly the same as the book. It's very faithful, but it's just so creative to a point that I really didn't expect it. I really enjoyed it, and I advise you to watch it. It's also considered, I guess, to be the first Soviet horror film. Also, my friend Guligan, who has a really cool channel in which he talks about horror media, so check him out, tells me that there's a Serbian remake of the film, which is called A Holy Place, and it's from 1990, and he says it's pretty interesting, so it's worth checking out. Anyway, about the V, most people seem to think that it was actually just Gogol's invention, probably based on some folk Ukrainian beliefs, but at the end of the day just rewritten by his genius, I guess. Upir. So here we have one that I personally find fascinating because I like vampires. The Upir is basically the Slavic version of the vampire. And as in most other cultures, these guys fit in the undead category. Specifically those undead whose soul hasn't found peace on the other side. Apparently they're especially popular in the Balkans, and if anybody has like a Balkan folklore Iceberg, please send it to me. It will be really fun to check it out. And it's again one of those creatures that each region seems to interpret their own way. And even its naming has a nebulous etymology, possibly reflecting the beliefs around the creature. Among the different theories, I found that the name could probably come from a Serbian word, which would mean like inflation or inflated, while in other cultures they can vary from stuff more similar to vampire or something like vukodlak, which obviously shows us that it's somewhat believed to be tied to the volkolak, which is basically the Slavic werewolf, which we discussed in the first part, or even stuff like Drakus, which I guess emphasizes its ties to the demonic. And I found even Strigon, which I don't know exactly from which language that is, but it seems closer to the figure of a warlock in this case. In general, there's a lot of different names and I'm not gonna sit here and list them all, just trust me that there's a lot. But how is an Upir created? Well, it's usually believed to be people whose birth, life or death are somehow marked by the infraction of ritual and moral norms. More specifically, they're people who died in violent or unnatural ways, or for which the normal burial rites weren't respected. And here again, there's a million different versions of this. It could be people who were murdered, who took their own life, who died from sickness, people who weren't baptized, for example, or who died without a final confession, people who died on a sacred holiday, or just in the dark, or even just people who had unresolved business on this side. Some southern Slavs consider the time between the death and the burial to be especially dangerous for the creation of an upur. Even little things like passing objects over the body of the dead person, or like dropping something inside of the coffin, or a bird landing in the coffin, or rainwater falling inside of the coffin, or even people carrying the coffin to the cemetery at one point turning around, all of these things could lead to the creation of a vampire. Apparently in Serbia it was believed that a vampire could be created when a person was buried in a place where a comet landed, which I thought was really cool. While others believed that people like sinners, murderers, or thieves, or alcoholics, or warlocks could become vampires. While some said that it was just destiny, I guess. If you were like the 6th or 7th child in a family, then you would become a vampire. Or being born in the wrong hour, or on the wrong day, or on a holiday. Or even that it was the parents' fault, that they would not follow the right tradition when it came to raising their child, or stuff like that. In southern Slavic folklore, it was believed that a vampire could be created in the 40 days after the burial. If it wasn't destroyed in that time, apparently it would drink enough blood to become powerful again and to hide himself among the people for many years to come. They're usually described as dead people for obvious reasons, usually wearing the clothes they were buried in, but the physical characteristics could change depending on like the different region once again. Some say they were huge in stature, others say that they had huge heads, or that they had like huge teeth, others say they had a tail, or like little hidden holes through which their soul would leave their body, while others thought that they had no eyebrows, no hands or no nose, and they're often described as having a red face or red eyes. One recurring characteristic is their body being bloated. Some say that the vampires had no bones and were just like skin filled with blood, and that's why they were bloated, or that a devil was wearing their skin. The signs of a dead body being an upir could be, for example, the fact that it laid face down, or that it laid on the side, or just in an unnatural position, or that it might be smiling, or apparently, and this was the funniest one for me, and I think it's like a specifically Ukrainian belief, that the body could be smoking a pipe. And that would be a telltale sign. The vampire is usually believed to come out at night and to harm people or animals by like killing them, sucking their blood, or transmitting diseases and stuff. And they would usually start with the family members and close friends. And I guess the Bulgarians have the most polite vampires because I've read that they wouldn't come out on a Saturday. So we could go on forever about vampires, and I've already talked about them in my 3rd ever video. And the main thing that we understood there was the fact that these are a creature that's very easily explained by people's lack of understanding of how decomposition or diseases work in general. That's one of the main reasons for which vampires are usually described as being bloated, because that's what happens to a dead body. And it's also why one of the main ways to kill them is to drive a stake through their hearts. Pointy object and bloated corpse filled with gases. You know. It's also why the vampires would usually start their killing from the family and close friends, because if that person died from a disease, it is possible that they also transmitted the disease to their family. And also why they're said to come out at night, because everybody's sleeping during the night, and during the day they wouldn't see any evidence of vampire activity, or at least they would like find dead bodies and stuff, but they wouldn't see the vampires themselves, so of course they had to be around during the night, when nobody sees them, right? The history of vampires in general is very fascinating, and I advise you to explore it for yourself too. Moving on. Bolotnik. So the Bolotnik, or Bolotyanik in Ukrainian, is the evil spirit of the swamp. For this one, I haven't really found a generalized view, but mostly either specific Russian versions or specific like Belarusian and Ukrainian versions, which I can't really read. So I'll have to trust the Wikipedia on this one, I guess, which at least has some sources cited. The descriptions of this thing mostly range from an eyeless, bloated, disgusting creature that lays at the bottom of a swamp, to a hairy man with long hands and a tail, to, specifically in northern Russia apparently, its female counterpart, the Poludnitsa, which is basically a Rusalka of the swamp. Its objective would be that of luring people into the swamp and suddenly attacking them. It would grab them by the legs and slowly drag them down the water and drown them. Apparently he's thought to be especially dangerous to drunk people. Now you see what's going on here, right? This guy, similarly to the other creatures, is like a folk invention to stop people from going into dangerous places or to explain why people die in those places. Obviously, swamps are pretty dangerous. They're full of unstable terrain which could swallow you up like quicksand without you even realizing it. And depending on the country, you could also have like dangerous animals. And here I wanted to mention what is for me, I guess, just the most interesting part about all of this. Just the idea of thinking how real all of these creatures were back then to people. Even talking with my mother. As a kid, she said she was told to not go into the forest or the swamp because there would be like Leshri or Rusalkas waiting for them and waiting to steal children and kill them, which obviously was just a way to stop children from playing in dangerous places and perhaps get lost in the forest and stuff, right? But at the same time, I guess that the world must have seemed like a mysterious and magical place, although it has its dangers, you know, but it's still somewhat cool, right? It stimulates your imagination. I wonder if kids now have that, or if they just don't believe in anything like paranormal or magical except Santa Claus. Mother Moist Earth, which every time I hear the word moist, I always think about that one meme. Mother Moist Earth, or Mать Сыра Земля, or this in Belarusian and in Ukrainian and Serbian. This is basically the personification of the earth and of fertility. Goddess Earth, I guess, or Mother Nature, you could say. It's not too dissimilar from older ancient Greek representation like Gaia. She's the mother of all living things and that to which dead things return. But also the mother of fertility and growth, which is probably why it's called moist, because it indicates a fertile ground. She's thought to be one of the oldest deities in the Slavic pantheon, and sometimes there is this duality and union between Mother Earth and Father Sky, which again is quite similar to Gaia and Uranus for the Greeks. There's not much I found about her, except the fact that during the Christianization, I guess she was slowly integrated in the figure of the Virgin Mary, because, you know, they couldn't allow to have like a goddess in their pantheon in Christian faith. I'm getting very tired at this point, I'm sorry. I'm gonna mess up, alright? Fiery Serpent, or Огненный Змей, or variations thereof. So we've already talked about Zmei Gorыныч in the first part of the Iceberg, and this one seems to be its more general archetype. It is, as the name suggests, not too dissimilar from the Western interpretation of the dragon, basically a giant reptile that flies around breathing fire, and it is even often said that the fiery serpents would steal or hoard gold in their lairs. One specific thing though here is the fact that, as I've mentioned with Zmei Gorыныч, the fiery serpent is believed to be especially tied to women. It is often believed that the serpent would seduce or force himself onto women who had either lost their husband or that were easily convinced into sinning or who lost their innocence. He can appear as their husband or some other beautiful man and basically convince them to sleep with him. Some believe that one of the ways to tell if he was the real husband, for example, was to see if he had a spine, for example, by feeling it. And if he did, it was the real husband. If he didn't, it was the fiery serpent. And I think in Ukraine specifically, it was believed that he would attract women by basically flying around and throwing riches and gold and like expensive things around, and whoever would pick them up, I guess, would fall for his trap. Then the serpent would, for example, slowly suck their life out of them, while at the same time giving them constantly more and more gold and riches, to the point where the woman would die. The woman could also become pregnant from the serpent, and there's a lot of variations on what would happen afterwards. She would either give birth to like a serpent child who, in some versions, or I guess epic poems or Belinas, would then grow up to battle his fiery serpent father and defeat him, or the pregnancy could last an unnaturally long amount of time and end up in nothing, or like the woman would give birth to sand. In some places, falling stars that you could see at night in the sky were believed to be the fiery serpent flying around. So once again, it's that archetypal figure of the serpent convincing women into sinning, which, as I've mentioned in the first part, is also present in the Genesis. Mikula Seleninovich, I hope I pronounced that right. So we get another bogatyr, but this one is believed to be the strongest of them all. And I want to show you what Return to Crab, the author of the Iceberg, wrote, because sometimes his wording is just very funny to me. The most powerful bogatyr ever. A regular farmer who can lift the weight of the entire earth in his bag. You know, just a normal farmer. It's like a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure description. Anyway, he is another hero that can be found in the ancient Bilinas, and he is believed to be the son of Mother Moist Earth. One of his characteristics, I guess, is the fact that he carries the weight of the entire world, or Tyaga, which in this case we could translate as gravitational pull, in a bag. And he just carries that around with no effort, I guess. And one of the main stories about him includes Svyatogor, the giant bogatyr we've talked about before. In this tale, Svyatogor is boasting that he could, like, lift the weight of the entire world, right? And Mikula just walks up to him and says like, alright, then lift my bag. And as Svyatogor tries, he just cannot do it. And every time he tries to lift it, he is pushed further and further down into the ground. And then Mikula just comes up to him and lifts the bag with one hand. After the Christianization, he is associated with the figure of Saint Nicholas, because of course he is. These guys couldn't go a moment without mentioning Saint Nicholas. He's everywhere I looked, in every story pretty much. It's like he's always around the corner ready to jump into a story. Oh, we're talking about me? Oh, no. Oh, you need me? No? Oh, okay. What was that? Yeah? No? Oh, okay. Sorry. It is also said that Mikula had two daughters, Vasilisa and Nastasia, who were female bogatyr, aka Poludnitsa. So the Poludnitsa are basically the female versions of the bogatyr. Apparently their main activity was just like going into a field and fighting male heroes one-on-one. They're sometimes or often said to be stronger and smarter than their male counterparts. There's this one story mentioned in Wikipedia where the bogatyr Dunai Ivanovich is running after Anastasia, the daughter of Mikula from before, because they're like having a duel, and he runs after her and reaches her and then hits her very hard over the head. But this absolute savage just turns around and says, "Oh, I thought it was mosquitoes biting me, but I guess it's just a Russian bogatyr hitting me over the head." Which, you know, is just one of my favorite dynamics ever in literature. It immediately made me think of Torquato Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered, in which you have the character of Clorinda. This is an amazing Italian epic poem from like the late 16th century, in which, as usual, have these stories about knights dueling and fighting wars and stuff. And Tasso decided to include this amazing character, which is a female knight named Clorinda. And like every one of the knights is always fighting like they have the berserker armor on. And she just whoops everybody's ass, like, during the whole poem. She just goes around and kicks everyone in the butt. And ends up being one of the most memorable characters. Sometimes those old writers really knew where the good stuff was. You know what I mean? You can tell I'm tired because I'm just drifting to absolutely unrelated stuff. I'm sorry, let's get back into it. So how does Nastasia's and Nai's story end? Well, she absolutely demolishes him. At the end, she grabs him by his blonde curls and just like rips him off his saddle, and somehow, without looking, she puts him in her pocket. Which, again, the logistics here, the pocket has to be like a big bag or something, right? I can't believe she's like so huge that she can just grab this hero and just put him in her pant pocket or something. Anyway, she doesn't look, and then she thinks to herself, who have I actually captured? Now I will look, and if I like this bogatyr, I'm gonna marry him. If I don't like him, I'm gonna cut his head off. Then she looks, and she likes him, so she marries him. I can tell you for a fact that that marriage is gonna last. Пересвет and Челубей. And here we are at the last entry of this tier of the iceberg. It refers to a legend around the Battle of Kulikovo, which took place in 1380 and was fought between the Golden Horde and the Russian forces. According to the legend, the battle opened between a duel between the Orthodox fighter, monk, warrior Alexander Peresvet and the Tatar champion Челубей. The two fought on horseback and with spears, so basically jousting, and they ended up killing each other. Although some sources say that Челубей fell off his horse, while Peresvet, while being mortally wounded, still remained on his saddle, and others even say that with his last strength he turned back and gave the starting battle speech to his people. The battle itself is a legend, but Peresvet could have actually been a historical figure, though he probably died in that battle or in some other battle of those years, and there's not much known about him. So there we go. we reached the end of the third tier of the iceberg. And that was a lot. I hope that you guys enjoyed this and that my accuracy was better when compared to the first video, and that it was just more interesting in general. Please let me know if you have any corrections or suggestions for the next part, and you know, we'll see how this goes. If it goes well, there'll be another part. If not, goodbye forever. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to my patrons for supporting me, and thanks to Return to Crab for providing like both the iceberg chart and some books that I actually used for the research in this part. Anyway, I am gonna have a nap now. Goodbye, and see you, space serpents.